Hello and welcome to the Retro Adventurers. I'm Ben Collier, here today with Jason Compton, and today we're struggling under a mountain of correspondence. I cannot move for letters and telegrams, and my ears are literally, they're ringing with notifications from my computer. You've got mail. We've got loads of it. Today we're going to be covering a couple of great games. We've got Inhumane, which is quite something. And we're also going to be covering the first episode of Knight Orc. We set out, Jason, didn't we, with the intention of doing the whole thing, and discovered that it's a little on the large side.
Well, yes, this is the long awaited, delayed appearance of Knight Orc on the Retro Adventures, and we're still only going to do the first section of it, and there's a few different reasons for that, not least of which is this mountain of correspondence. Yes, email and Blue Sky and our own reporters doing their own independent, news gathering. So
it's crazy. The world of 1980s text adventures is popping,
thriving.
It's fantastic. So on that note, should we start? Jason, Nick's been busy, hasn't he? He's sent us through a couple of bits and bobs.
Yes, retro adventurer Nick Moffat points out that there's a collection on archive.org of magic micro adventure books. This is a curated collection of various PDFs from the 80s, looks like through at least the 2000s. Everything from the micro adventure series that were kind of a spin on choose your own adventure books, but the idea was that you would then type in a short basic program to advance in the adventure. There are other, here's a text adventure contained in this book. There are novelizations of games out there. Quite a cool collection, retro gaming books, fiction, and we will, of course, link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, they do look cool, don't they? They've got some lovely old school books. So if you fancy doing a bit of a type in, dear listener, then that's the thing. That's the thing, I think.
And also caught in our news dragnet is the keyword that's been confounding text adventure searches for as long as there have been search engines. This May, the Infocom conference in London was put together once again by IEEE. Don't go to it because it's just IEEE stuff. Unfortunately, Infocom has a few other meanings out there, and one of them is this IEEE conference. So yes, it clogging up our search results for 30 years and counting.
Well, I don't know about you, but if you are particularly interested in an international conference on computer communications, then by all means do go. Yeah, you won't be eaten by a grue, that's for sure. Right, got one here. This came up on Hacker News. How to program a text adventure in C. This is an item that was trending on HN. This is a chap called Ruud Helderman. And he's written this guide. It's on GitHub, and he's got a blog post about it. And it is what it does what it says on the tin. It's a guide to writing your own text adventure. So if you want to learn C, if you've not been swayed by the dubious allures of Rust, and you want to learn that and write your own text adventure at the same time, absolutely great resource there. So that's great. Thank you very much to Ruud Helderman for creating that. That looks super. Jason.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you first because you'll see this on the text adventure creation forums and discussion groups. Even to this day, there's never been a shortage of parser game creation tools, and certainly they're better now than ever. But you will see minorities show up and say, "Nope, I want to roll this my own. I want to build it from scratch." Is that something that has ever appealed to you? You, an information technology professional?
It has. Do you know what? Years and years ago, probably in about 2017. I wrote a blog post about how writing a text adventure was a great way to learn a new language. There's an awful lot of stuff. It doesn't throw you in so far into the deep end that everything's going to go horribly wrong. But you do learn an awful... You have to use a lot of different features of the language, and it's a really good first step to learning something. We mentioned a text adventure written in Natural a while back, and I've certainly done it once or twice when I wanted to learn it. In fact, ironically, I wrote a text adventure in Rust. So So yeah, no, absolutely, Jason. Have you rolled your own parser before?
Oh, I mean, never got any further than being a very basic programmer in the mid '80s, and just like looking for strings. And I never. Many programmers are some of my very best friends, but I myself have never been able to hang with you like so.
Uh, I suppose my first one was the dubiously named Death Tie, which I wrote at the age of 11.
Death tie, as in necktie.
As, I mean, I guess, yeah. Yeah, it was before I kind of understood how you could have how you could sort of make your locations dynamic. So it was very much a case of if they type north, then do this.
Yeah.
Horrendously sort of circuitous and if then. But that was my first attempt. I think that's been consigned to a sort of trash heap somewhere, sadly.
We'll have to put out a little search for that. But in games that don't need a search, Dogstar Adventure has been ported to the Z machine. It's been implemented in straight Inform 6. It doesn't rely on any of the libraries, so it actually does run briskly on pretty much anything you can get an Infocom interpreter on. This game is one of those that was very influential in the early days. It's considered to be the first text adventure published, where its code was published in a magazine, 1979 May issue of Softside, which we'll definitely take a look at in an upcoming magazine roundup. And you would see Dogstar Adventure get ported to a lot of those emerging machines in the late 70s and early 80s, but it's sort of fallen off the table. We remember games like Colossal Cave and the things that it spawned, Zork, of course, but Dogstar was, at the time, one of the bigs, and it's sort of lost some prominence. So this is a chance to play it on virtually anything in this new Z Machine format.
Cool. Are we going to put it on the list, Jason?
Yeah, we will put it on the list with credit to Lance Miklas for his work.
Fantastic. Very good stuff. Right. So, Jason, remind me, what was the name of that peculiar device that was doing the rounds that they had decided it was an e-ink display or something, and it was going to have Zork 5 on somehow. What was that called?
Oh, yeah. What was that thing?
I can't remember what it's called. Anyway,
it was the Ink console.
The Ink console. So the Ink console. For those of you who pay close attention to this podcast, you might remember a news item we did a while back on the Ink console. I don't know what's happened to that. However, if you'd like something that does definitely exist, we've got this here, the Evertop. This appeared this last week. It's a portable PC. This is very cool. Portable PC emulates an IBM XT with an 80186. So very few PCs had an 80186 unless you were using some nasty research machines thing in the UK. With an 80186 processor and a megabyte of RAM, can run DOS, Minix, and some other old 1980s operating systems, and runs Windows up to version 3.0. It's got an e-ink display, low power microcontroller. It's got effectively two 10, that doesn't make it much sense, 10,000 milliamp hour batteries.
Yeah, you're reading that right.
And
two 10,000 milliamp batteries. Milliamp hour.
So two 10 amp batteries. Oh, no. Anyway.
Amp hour.
Never mind. Big batteries. And extreme power saving measures. So it can run for literally, they're saying perhaps thousands of hours on a single charge. So if you really want to do your retro adventuring on something that not only has that, but also a solar panel. So if you're going out into the wilderness and you want to play your adventure games, then this could be the device for you if you're not willing to wait for the Ink console or whatever.
Now, to be clear, this is very project hacky. It's built on I believe it's an ESP32 microcontroller, which is amazing that just how much power you can squeeze out of those things these days. Guides for 3D printing the case and how to cobble together these various pieces. For the likes of us, they do have examples of playing things like Zork and King's Quest and stuff like that. Pirate Adventure gets a little demo there. So nice. they know their audience for this odd low scale DOS era project.
Very very peculiar. It's the sort of thing that I'd accidentally buy. Jason.
Yeah, so we got some correspondence from Harry Viking, if that is his real name. Says,
Sure it is.
Mr. or Ms. Viking says they've been listening to our podcast for a while now, wanted to reach out after listening to Red Hawk, which I have a soft spot for. Viking says, has Red Hawk for the Spectrum reminded me of another title by Melbourne House, The Mystery of Arkham Manor. If you have not heard of this game before, which I had not, do check it out. It's very much in the same vein as a lot of post-text adventures where you have a choice of verbs, but still feel like it has one of its feet firmly planted in the text adventure realm. You play the part of a reporter and can write your own in-game notes and publications, including photographs you take through game screenshots. Quite a novelty at the time. Now, I did a quick search on this, and I came across a neo-retro title called The Mystery of Markham Manor, which is actually more of a pure text adventure. And so we had a little back and forth conversation about that. And there was also a recommendation to play Unhallowed, which is a more recent creation in PAW. Harry Viking says, recommend checking it out as it follows the LucasArts philosophy of not having death or dead ends and a heavily reduced parser to take away the guessing game aspect of typing in commands. And I feel compelled to pedantically point out that LucasArts didn't always take dead ends and deaths out of the game. It was kind of Day of the Tentacle that really solidified that, you can get stuck, but you can't get permanently broken. There's ways to, plenty of ways to die in Maniac Mansion, and even a handful in Zach McCracken and games like that as well. But thank you for those recommendations, with kind of two recommendations that maybe turned into three for The Mystery of Arkham Manor, maybe The Mystery of Markham Manor, and Unhallowed.
Well, Jason, this confused me. It confused you one way. It confused me a different way, because this was off the back of Red Hawk, and we'd done these kind of superhero stuff, hadn't we? And when I saw Arkham, I thought, oh, hang on a second, wasn't that a Batman thing? Because you got was it the Arkham Asylum? Yeah, but this has got absolutely nothing, I assume, unless you're going to correct me. I can see you sort of responding there.
No, I'm listening. I'm an engaged partner, Ben.
Engaged. Nothing to do with Batman, right?
Correct. Yeah, and the Arkham business that goes back to Lovecraft. I think the comparison here was between the interface of Red Hawk and Arkham Manor.
Yeah.
Yes, like Batman Arkham Asylum, but Arkham has kind of become just a public domain name for spooky places where bad and mysterious things happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So and very much sort of Cthulhu mythos originally, wasn't it? Yes.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah. So we've got another one. We're struggling through the bag here. We're getting through the bag. Another one here. From David, from David Templeton, who we've had a few very nice emails from. He was talking about whether or not we would like to do like not entirely text adventures and all these sorts of things, and we had a good old chat about that. But he does say to us, he says, on the Balrog image from the best podcast we've ever done. He says, nice touch on the Balrog image for the podcast. He says, you may or may not have noticed in the link, in the UK, I can attest to this, toilet paper is known as bog roll. And I hope the spoonerism was intentional. So Balrog, bog, you get the idea.
Yeah.
So this was definitely intentional, wasn't it, Jason?
I mean, I hadn't thought of it, but either intentional or just a very happy coincidence from John Wilson, who definitely was dedicated to the craft.
Your subconscious was working overtime there, I think. I think that was the job done for you by that.
And David, yes, thank you for validating Ben's quest for all of the behind closed doors games, which I mean, I like it in a way because it gives us something to work for other than just the generic. Well, we can play thousands and thousands of games, but the behind closed doors, sort of metering those out over time.
And we're trying to cut down on the number of games that feature lavatories.
And
which is why Jason decided we were going to play Inhumane.
Well, and we'll get to that.
Okay.
So another item, Tufty McTavish, who we engage with quite a bit on Blue Sky, tagged us in his post for a copy of the text adventure Rick Hansen, which is proudly advertised as being a machine code adventure from Rubico Software. The authors seem to make a lot out of the fact that it was written in machine code, as noticed, and had text compression and 220 rooms, which anybody who listens to the Retro Adventurers knows that makes for the best games.
Definitely. Yes, every one of them well fleshed out.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the other detail here was that he had forgotten that it was in his collection from 85 or 86, had handwritten notes about playing the game. So it's sort of a personal discovery that he then shared with us. So appreciate that, Tufty.
That game is also going on the list.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll be
A BBC original. So absolutely,
yeah, fantastic. So finally, we were contacted by Judge Drock on Blue Sky. This is a good one. He told us he managed to dig up a copy of a cassette adventure game which looks extremely high quality. It's called Jolly Jack's Run Ashore. And it's on the C64, and it bills itself as an adult text adventure. Well, I briefly took a look to see if it's out there. It is out there. So that's not the only. It is out. It's been
preserved.
It's been preserved. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It is it is a thing that people know about. But I do notice that this is the C64 again, and for some reason, it seems that all of the most blue of adventure games end up on the C64. It's something about people who owned that machine. I don't know what it says about C64 owners. We'll have to see. C64 owners, if you'd like to write in and tell us. But no, that looks like great fun, and we unfortunately probably can't put it on the list because it's the content is probably a little bit on the.
But I think the can a completely clean podcast take on a game like this challenge? I think you sell us short, Ben. But yes, I was surprised because, and this only lends more fuel to your premise that the Commodore 64 users are by far the horniest of all the 8-bit computer users. I don't know if this is true for other machines, but there is a site. It's girls.c64.org that is kind of a repository for all the dirty stuff that we had, and I just looked it up, and it does not have Jolly Jack. It doesn't even have it on the wanted list.
Really?
Now, the site hasn't been updated in about a decade. It does have some other games that you've expressed interest in before then, Ben. So it may have been something that was found, sort of refound over the past 10 years.
I found it on archive.org. It's on archive.org, okay. So it is out there. I had a look at the first screen and then thought, okay, well, I'll save this for a future episode, perhaps. Brilliant. Well, miraculously, we've made our way to the bottom of the mailbag, and we can get on with our first game. So, Jason, over to you for this. This is something that you've got us playing, isn't it?
It is. Honestly, when we started up the podcast, this was a game that very quickly went to the top of my list of, I want to meet new friends and play this game with them. So glad we're having a chance to play this. The game is Inhumane. It was developed by Andrew Plotkin, who, and this is not an exaggeration, over the past 30 years, he is at worst the 1B of the most influential people in text adventure, interactive fiction going. But there was a time when he too was a teenager and did more silly things. And the game that he created, or one of the games that he created and sort of got out into the wild, was this game Inhumane that he wrote in Apple II Basic. And it was featured in the Book of Adventure Games Part 2 by Kim Shuat. I've mentioned these books a lot because for me, at least, they were kind of the main repository of maps and hints and so forth. And Kim Shuat was clearly an Apple II enthusiast. He mentioned as much and obviously made quite an effort to get all the Apple II adventures that he could, and to fill out the page count in Book of Adventure Games 2, he included this game. So I'm going to read the description. This is a takeoff on the desert epic Infidel with Roboff, the villain from Mask of the Sun, thrown in for good measure. Roboff has abandoned you in your tent after looting the nearby pyramid of most of its goodies. All that's left for you in this 46-location game is the gold casket. All you have to do is find it. Now, when I read about this game, I was like, this sounds amazing. But, back in the late 80s, if you didn't have a random public, domain game, let alone for a platform you didn't own, you might never see it. And even as the early 90s rolled around, you started to get Apple emulation. This wasn't a game that was out there. But when the Inform language, which was the first alternative way to compile to Infocom's Z machine, when that came out, and Andrew Plotkin was part of that scene, he decided to re-implement Inhumane in the I think it was Inform 5 at the time. So I was following that scene and I saw it and I'm like, this is amazing. I finally get to play this game that I've been thinking about playing for years. Now, I did an interview with Andrew actually a few months ago. It's been kind of sitting and waiting for us to get to this. So we will have that in an episode soon where he talks through his recollections of creating this game. Before we get too much deeper into Inhumane, let me just back up and talk to Ben here. So Inhumane is leveraging Infidel lore, which, spoiler alert, Infidel is notoriously a game that you cannot win without dying. You play, essentially a tomb raider, a grave robber, and the only way to achieve the maximum score is to essentially release the final trap that seals you in with the treasure. We have not covered that game yet. That's coming up. We have covered, Dave and I covered Mask of the Sun, and this appearance of Roboff just seems to be kind of a blending of worlds. But had you run into Inhumane? Had you seen modern Plotkin games, Infidel, Mask of the Sun? What do you got?
Obviously hugely aware of Plotkin.
Okay.
Like I say, he's the sort of the doyen of the modern interactive fiction movement, as much as anything else. This is interesting, isn't it? I think this is a bit like I felt a little bit like I was playing Board of the Rings without having any knowledge whatsoever, or even any sort of knowledge of the Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit. I knew it was a pastiche of Infidel, but it stands on its own 2 feet. No, I wasn't aware of it. I am now, and I'm very pleased I'm aware of it. Because it's a lovely little, and we talk about appetizers. Sometimes we come up with appetizers in this podcast, which sort of rival the main act in terms of the amount of effort that you need to put into them to win them. This isn't true of this one. It is actually quite a nice, what I call it, a pocket adventure.
Yeah,
nice little pocket adventure. It's not overwhelming. I mean, the first thing I did when I realised that it was Infidel, it was doing the pastiches, I immediately got out my streaming media and put on Power Slave by Iron Maiden in the background to play. So I had that on while I was playing it to add atmosphere. So Jason, take us through the first few scenes here.
Yes. So then this is what Ben had teed up. And I got to admit, I had completely forgotten about this. So the opening scene is essentially the same as the opening scene from Infidel, just with Roboff rather than I won't say nameless, but in Infidel, it's your kind of local aides that have decided to take all the stuff and leave you to die in the desert. You've been working with Roboff here, so Roboff has stranded you in the tent. There's no way out. An emergency radio that doesn't work until you get the get the gold casket that you're after. But I had forgotten there's a bluff way to get down into the tomb, and then the real way is through the toilet in Roboff's tent. Now, as I was replaying this, I was like, oh, yeah, okay. We'll see if Ben picks up on that. And
how many episodes in Encounter? We have gone 5 podcasts without not mentioning lavatories in text adventures. It's like a sort of workplace health notice board kind of piece we need to run, don't we? It's great. I was very pleased to see the emergence of the perennial lavatory. It's great.
So yes, once you're into the main tomb, you eventually discover, and it doesn't take very long actually, there's lots of ways to die in the tomb, but ultimately what you're trying to do is be killed by 9 specific traps. So like just wandering off the edge of a cliff or just being gnawed to death by rats in the dark, that doesn't count. And you're told like, no, this doesn't count. So it's kind of doubling down or I guess times ninesing on the Infidel concept of get killed so that you can win. And Kim Schuett wasn't terribly enthused. He does talk about the fact that yes, it's a manageable game to play. The original basic version, which seems to be lost, sadly, says there's not a save game feature, but you're probably not going to need it. And really, there's not. I don't believe there's any sort of permanent death or ways to to get yourself in a no-win situation. But he says, aside from its semi-humorous premise, this game doesn't offer much. And honestly, my guilty pleasure is that I think this is my favorite Andrew Plotkin game that I've ever played. Maybe it's just because it's approachable. I like the jokes. I liked them when I was in college, and I first played the Inform adaptation. I still like it today.
It's good fun. I mean, there were some really obscure, peculiar references in there. I mean, there are jokes that are funny because they're you're doing something, you're trying to get killed, you try to get killed one way, you don't, and then a massive spike comes out and kills you. So the deaths are, a lot of them are completely unpredictable. You just happen to die because you've got to a particular place. But I didn't understand the Doctor Who stuff, or we had a Dalek. And we have an incompetent Harry Sullivan. And I looked that up. And Harry Sullivan was a Doctor Who companion from 1974.
But you have to remember that, and what, not strictly a 10-year lag, but more or less. A lot of Doctor Who was shown in the U.S. on our public broadcasting affiliates. And so, in the early 80s, that was kind of the peak of getting those Tom Baker episodes and stuff like that. So.
Yeah. So you get called an incompetent. Presumably Harry Sullivan was a bit useless as a Doctor Who companion. And then these very strange references to geometry. The primary room, it says this room is a conic surface with exits at even multiples of 90 degrees. In the center is a regular square pyramid with a narrow vertex angle. And that's it's deliberately silly. But it's a joke. It's an in-joke, isn't it? A lot of these things are in-jokes.
In-jokes, or just kind of a clever young man being clever. It's tough to peel it apart.
I think there was something, if you look at the notes, there was something about, he said there was one of his friends or something had this kind of terrible habit of talking about geometry too much or something.
Oh, yeah. And yes, in the sort of Invisiclues format, there's a lot of historical information that Andrew remembered in the mid-90s when we talked about it 30 years later. Some of that stuff has faded as it does. But you can get sort of the background and the other games in the series that they were going to make, because this is notoriously published by Infobomb, and he uses or used the Apple II's blink capability to make the B blink. The Z machine doesn't support that, so it's just a reversed character being played here. But there are some lovely files. If when you open the game up, you're able to click, and there's a lot of description and lots of good content about the game that you can read. The only other thing I noticed on here was I like the dork mids. Yes, as opposed to Zork mids.
Yes, sorry, listener. So obviously in Infocom in Zork, you've got the Zork mids, and you find money and they're dork mids, which is a great sort of teenage joke there. So I would play this again.
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting how it anticipates. And again, this was somebody, he's a teenager, he's writing this game, for fun, to share around a little bit on bulletin boards, and, it makes its way to quote unquote serious adults like Kim Schuett and so forth. But it does in a lot of ways prefigure what the text adventure market, for lack of a better term, is going to turn into. It's going to turn into smaller games. It's going to turn into more forgiving games. Ones that kind of take a premise and and play with it a little bit, or a lot. To the tune of 9. In that Plotkin was there to kind of push all of those things, even further when he sort of comes back into the text adventure scene in the 90s. So thank you very much for playing this one with me, Ben. I recommend it unreservedly. This is a game that's early enough in Inform that, again, it will run on any platform that you can get an Infocom interpreter on. It is playable online off of IFDB as well. Personally, for me, there's something about the little bit of lag that you can get in an Infocom game or other text adventures as commands are processing. Something about the absolute immediate response on a multi-gigahertz machine doesn't quite feel right. Now, things can go too far in the other direction, as we will talk about in a few minutes. But whether you pick a classic platform or just play it on the web, I think it's a good time. Really appreciate you guys letting me have a platform to sing the praises of Inhumane, which its creator, I wouldn't say disavows, but certainly thinks he's made dozens of better works. But I'm not so sure.
Do you know what, Jason? This reminded me a little bit of Jacaranda Jim.
I mean,
I was expecting you to slightly take offense there.
but we're going to let the audience hear Jacaranda Jim. We're going to let the audience hear about Inhumane, and maybe that's sort of a mid-year check-in with the audience. Maybe an elimination bracket of toilet-based games. Which one reigns supreme.
Good stuff. Right. Well, in that case, I certainly give it 5 out of 5, and I'm guessing you do too, Jason.
I give it 9 deaths out of 10.
So, Knight Orc. Right. Okay. So this was written by Pete Austin. So it's from 1987. It's a Rainbird release, and it's got a very, very unusual premise. So it casts you as an orc in a world where effectively the orcs they had a big battle some time ago. Everything is going badly for the orcs, and you get an opportunity effectively to take it back at the humans. However, as the novella explains, you end up as the main character in this. You're effectively left with the humans after a raid goes somewhat awry. Jason.
Mm-hmm. The raid, as described in the novella, that does go on for a little while. Yes, this is a game from level 9, not the only one to come with a novella. When we do eventually get around to Snowball and stuff like that, we'll talk about how I do remember being drawn in by that one. The Knight Orc novella, I found that I was ready to be done. Like no one chapter, and the chapters are pretty bite-sized, a couple pages. No one chapter of it was like off-putting, but at some point I was like, I would like to play the game now, but I bet I'm going to need this information before I can get too much further. But yes, the novella, The Sign of the Orc by Peter McBride, sets us up. Do you want to talk a little bit about the writing in there before we jump to the game itself?
Yeah, it's interesting. So what I was going to say, this is a game. This is in 3 parts.
Yes.
I guess that the game originally came on 3 discs, perhaps as well, or maybe one and another.
Yeah, it would depend on the platform, and we'll talk a minute about which platforms it's out for, and it really gives the Infocom list a run for its money. But yes. Depending on what the platform was, it would be either a different tape load or disc load. I was playing the 64 version that comes on 2 disc sides, and you can just see it loading in the second module as you make that transition.
So you've got that. So anyway, the novella. Let me read out the start of it. Grok leant against the cobwebbed window frame and stared out over the open plain. The grasslands were sprinkled with the pink and yellow of spring flowers. The scattered trees sparkled with the first unfurling leaves. The air trilled to the sound of larks and linnets, and the sun shone brightly in a clear blue sky, dappled with pretty little fluffy white clouds. A perfect spring day, so different from the year before and the 30 years before that, when the plains had been bare and silent and shrouded in a smog so thick that day and night were as one. When all that was bright and good had been swept away by the forces of dark. Cool, what a waste of 30 years, Grok grumbled. Must get the lads busy again and get out there and devastate it. And so, of course, that's what they do. They go and they make their attack. What was interesting about this, it wasn't the most engaging. I didn't think it was the most engaging book. It was funny in places. What struck me about it actually was I don't know if our readers are familiar with Warhammer and what they've done with orcs. You've got this kind of lots of uses of Ks and Zs and they've got a very specific take on the orc in Warhammer. And this was 87. By which time the Warhammer brand would have started to be quite visible. And you'd see Zs and Ks, lots of those floating up in here. So I think this take on the orc in this might have been a little bit influenced by Warhammer. I'm not sure whether that's correct or not, but I don't think before this point you had orcs, with a Z on the end and all that sort of stuff. I think it was. I think this is definitely influenced by it. But yes, they put a raiding party together and go and visit the pub, and they effectively they managed to take the pub. When the game starts, character from the book has left anyway, and you're left as this other fella who has been cruelly put in knight's armor and is set to joust against the humans. That's basically where we begin.
Yes. Did Warhammer also have gay dragons? Before we move on, as I'm reading the story, there's Brandon the dwarf and his friend the dragon, and I'm like, wait, what are we doing with this? And then eventually it just calls it out, like that Brandon is singing a song, and the dragon says, "Is it about gold?" asked the dragon, who liked songs, but most of all loved those that were about gold. And actually, no, this one is called the Gay Dragon. Brandon replied, just kind of like, all right, we're just gonna say what we're doing here.
It's brilliant. So this is the dragon is effectively cast after the mold of John Inman in Are You Being Served? It's that kind of level of camp, basically.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not going to attempt an I'm free or anything of that sort, but that's basically what we're talking about here with the dragon, who was actually a very good character. Yeah, all good stuff. So yes, we get to it. We find ourselves at the pub in the game. What were your first impressions, Jason, when you started playing?
So I mentioned I played it on the C64. I do want to talk about the absolute buffet of options players had at the time. I'm just going to read this down. You could play Knight Orc on Amiga, Amstrad CPC, Ben's favorite, the Amstrad PCW, Apple II, and I'm going to come back to that one. Atari ST, Atari 130XE/800XL, Commodore 64, MS-DOS, Mac, a 64K MSX, and there were two flavors for the Spectrum, one 48K strict tape load, and then there was a Spectrum 128 as well. And then apparently a BBC Micro version that may not have been an official release, but has kind of leaked its way out. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's interesting. So I obviously played the BBC version. Because it was, I think because I was able to find it on JSB.
Because it was there, yes.
It was there. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah,
so maybe I've got an inferior product.
Well, I mean, I think maybe just it didn't make it to the commercial stage. But I highlighted the Apple II because it's interesting to see Level 9, making that leap to say, no, we think there is an American audience. If you were listening to Topologica episodes, I've mentioned that I was surprised they didn't do Apple II or even C64. But obviously Level 9, whether it was encouraged by Rainbird, whether it was their own, kind of entrepreneurial instincts, they went ahead and published for that. I had initially wanted to play the Apple version just to kind of honor that. Struggled a little bit with the emulators I had handiest, so I wimped out and just played the C64 version. All that said, back to the initial impressions. I will say that I liked the graphics that I was getting at the outset. There's a title graphic. There's one of the sort of the arena setup where you're about to be trounced.
Yeah,
but
right.
This is one of those games where there's not and these are bitmap graphics, and that's important in a second.
Mm-hmm.
There really weren't all that many graphics in part 1, which it has its own little subtitle of Loosed Orc. Those of you who've been with the Retro Adventurers from the beginning may remember that back in April 2024, we said, well, our next game is going to be Knight Orc, and then things went a little sideways. It's a very big game. We took on a lot of other projects, so we're going to break this one up into pieces and just kind of break the jinx here with Knight Orc. But that said, what we did get in terms of graphics were fairly sparse, much more so than the Pawn, which I'd also remarked finding that phenomenon a little unusual. But the Pawn, I would this is strictly from memory, but if the Pawn had a graphic for, let's say, every 1 in 4 locations, 25% of them, this was maybe 1 in 10. So you'd stare at the same image a lot.
So in the version I was playing, which, like we were saying, possibly might be hooky. For basically a good portion of the start of the game, every single location you seem to go to, it would reload the same picture. So that picture of the ground you're in,
Yeah.
you'd go east, and it would
Oh, it's hitting the drive.
load
Ooh.
the picture again. It's like, oh, it's the same picture again, and you would carry on like that for a good, a long time. And then I think the next thing you're in the woods, and that's the next picture that comes up, and then it would repeat that over and over again until. So maybe, whether that was just like you say, if this was a hooky version, maybe it was randomly showing whatever picture it last showed. It did seem weird, and it was really frustrating because it was, you pause the game, the image comes up, oh, it's the same image again, and on we can go with controls. On that matter of like slightly tiresome things, you're also constantly hearing people shouting from afar. So someone would
Yes.
shout, "I found some gold" or something like that, did you find at any point it helped in any way?
The shouting from the distance?
Shouting.
Oh no. So let's talk
That was-
about yes. Let's talk about Knight Orc and the fact that it uses the vaunted KAOS system, KAOS, and which is essentially they're attempting to. The premise was they're trying to simulate the mud environment, the multi-user dungeon environment in the personal computer confines. And we've talked about this a lot. The notion that American text adventures tend to be more static. NPCs have, if there are any, have pretty prescribed duties. They may have a little bit of, they may say a random quip, but otherwise their behavior is pretty predictable. But we've seen, going back to The Hobbit and, going through to, level 9 now, this idea that, but what if we filled the universe with lots and lots of characters? Lancelot, we've played from level 9 already, certainly, had that in spades. Whereas the NPCs in Lancelot felt like you could lean on them at any time. Yeah, the Knight Orc Part 1 Loose Orc is full of people running around. There's Genghis Khan, there's a prophet, there's the Phantom of the Opera. But yes, they're just sort of shouting and filling up the screen. I found some gold. Does anybody have a treasure?
There's all this shouting. There's all these people asking for things, and none of it was particularly relevant. No. What I found this fascinating. Some of these NPCs you were talking about, some of these, say the Phantom of the Opera is here or something,
Yeah.
and so that was one. That one was odd. Then we've got, and then some of these. I had to look some of these up. So because I'm in Greater Manchester. The Prophet of Greater Manchester. Like, the Prophet of Greater Manchester? What on earth is this? So I looked it up. And it's from Round Our Way. So this chap, John Rowe. Right, here we go. He was a self-proclaimed prophet who taught that Ashton, which is just round the corner here, that Ashton would become the new, a slightly. So it's not. It's a lovely part of Greater Manchester. Let's put it that way. Would become the new Jerusalem, and he founded the Christian Israelites. Now, these people were effectively in Christian lingo. These people were Judaizers, which means they wanted to go back to all of the sort of the sort of Hebrew pre-New Testament ways of doing things.
The People's Front of Judea, sure.
Yeah. So and they all grew beards, which meant that they all got nicknamed the Beardies. That was their nickname. But they all had to be circumcised. And he himself, as it says here, Rowe insisted that all men undergo this. His own procedure was a large public event accompanied by a full brass band. And what on earth that's doing in Knight Orc, I haven't the faintest idea. But that is the Prophet of Greater Manchester. And I don't remember anything from the game involving large public circumcisions involving brass bands. But,
Not in part 1, anyway.
Maybe it'll come later. Maybe it'll turn out to be incredibly valuable and useful to the plot. But there you go. Yeah, and we also had the Fungus the Bucket Man, which is interesting. Now, Jason, in the States, Fungus the Bogeyman, is that a thing?
That's not a thing.
Right. UK, Fungus the Bogeyman, very famous in the 1980s. So there were a series of books about this fella who was a sort of green kind of trollish character who it just was involved in lots of stuff to do with snot. It was gross. But what's interesting about this, the Boggit Man. Now, where else do Boggits turn up?
Yeah, Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. So there's all this stuff in here. There's lots and lots of very self-referential and kind of cross-referential and plain peculiar references to some really obscure British stuff in here. Very interesting.
The positive thing that I'll say in defense of the Prophet of Greater Manchester and the Phantom of the Opera is that if the premise is we're simulating a mud in which lots of wacky characters are going to show up because they're your neighbors, but they're creating a wacky alias to play under. I guess that's the vibe. And the manual does give you pretty good information about how to interact with them, ways you can follow them, you can ask them to follow you. I did not have any luck ordering anybody around in part one. I don't know if you made much of an attempt to stop and ask them to do stuff, but. And I tried early on when you were asking, what did you think about those voices? I did try because the game offers. There's really a lot of convenience functions in the level 9 A machine. So for example, you can go to a place if you know where that place is, and there's ways that
very useful.
Like from being from a high vantage point, you can see a lot of places. You can run to it, which skips descriptions along the way. I liked getting the descriptions along the way personally. It was a way to kind of feel things in the world. You can find objects or locations that are in the world, and it'll take you to it. But yeah, you can ask people to tell you about things or to, I guess that you can tell them to find things. I hadn't really didn't really get much out of that, unfortunately.
How did you find the running worked for you? Because a lot of the time when I did it was a little bit peculiar. It would pause for some time, then some things would happen, then some events would fire, and it didn't. And then you most of the time you would end up where you wanted to go. Okay. But it sometimes got interrupted, and it would ask you if you wanted to continue.
Oh, okay. They may have just lucked out and not run into those, but I think that makes sense. So was it like, were people like attacking you or taking your stuff or something like that?
It would an event would fire, and then it would say, do you want to continue?
Okay.
You'd be like, okay, yes.
Because the idea with run is that you're not getting descriptions, so I think that's a convenience in there so that you don't miss a development in the world that you might want to know about.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Yeah. Cool. So, no, this is the first game, I think, where I've genuinely found myself learning new words.
Yes, there's a lot of vocab in this.
Yeah.
You can learn things about trees and ways to decorate them.
Yeah, hawsers, halyards, all sorts of things. But no, it genuinely, this was the first time, I think, that I'd played a game and thought, I don't know what that is. What are you talking about? It was unusually deep vocab. So yeah, other thoughts, Jason?
So we are promised a magic system. Did not, at least it's not part of the critical path. It's not part of anything that I found.
Not part one. No. Yeah. I think that comes later.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Yes, among the different characters that are pop culture references early on is the knight in white satin, obviously.
Oh yes,
reference.
Classic. Very good.
There is a sense of getting a chance after death, although the game does also have on most platforms, definitely on the 64, so certainly on more powerful ones, you can do. They have oops/undo support, which is really quite powerful. Yeah. There's RAM save and RAM restore, so rather than hitting disk and having to screw around with that, you can pack it away. Which is really quite impressive. The trade-off that I found, and I presume it had to be pretty close to this on the BBC, was that this game is slow, and it's not just the Commodore 64's disk access, because a lot of the time it's not hitting the disk. Nope. I think things are very heavily compressed to make everything fit, because only the graphics are loading from disk. So a lot of heavy compression. Parsing things was slow. Yeah. Even printing text was pretty slow.
Yes, I found the same thing, and it was made worse by this business of the BBC version, kind of loading the same image over and over again. Yeah, but yeah, absolutely.
Ultimately, part one is a rope collect game, which. Yeah. Speaking of pop culture references, I just kept thinking of the Monty Python sketch. I've fallen down this pit. Can you get a length of BBC rope? What length of BBC rope would you like? I should think we will need the longest length of BBC rope. Yeah, you collect up a lot of different rope-like things. You tie them together, and then you can win part one if you can pass the copy protection check. That novella is not just there for funsies. It's there to be a copy protection barrier. Oops.
Yeah.
So you got to be able to track that PDF down. I don't know if there are cracked versions out there, so you may want to be sure that you keep that PDF handy. I was intrigued when the manual was telling me about the ability not just to find things or go to things, but they had the flexible use of all or everything, and I found myself very intrigued by examine everything. What would that get me? And weirdly, it doesn't work on the first turn because you're kind of still struggling to be free, and they've kind of locked off a lot of commands. Later on, unfortunately, it literally does examine everything. It examines everything in your inventory and everything in the area. So it gets pretty tedious. If you remember back from Magnetic Scrolls, the Pawn, there was that function to show you like what all the pronouns are currently considered. And when I went to Rapunzel, who, by the way, I just loved the description that Rapunzel was pouting sexily. That definitely meshes with my bias towards Rapunzel. So when I walked into that room, I was like, okay, I'm just going to be a guy who plays text adventures and also reviews them. So I go in the room or the area. It describes Rapunzel, and I said, examine her. And the game's response was, you can't see the welcome mat. So clearly it makes, he, her, and it all the same thing, and just the last object you've referred to. So I'd just done the puzzle that involved the welcome mat, and it was just going back to that. So unlike Magnetic Scrolls, it wasn't kind of continually trying to fit new things to pronouns, but I did think that was pretty funny, but there was a reason for it. Yeah. Did you get any fun emergent behavior from all the people running around? Like I said, I tried to get them to follow me. It didn't really work. I wandered into Genghis Khan killing the prophet, which he eventually did finish off. But other than that, it was just sort of people around.
Yes, there was. I had that in. At one point, there was a massive fight going on, absolutely huge fight that had no bearing on anything. But that was, and again, peculiar because you're trying to do something, and all of a sudden it feels like, and now I see what you mean, because you're talking about it trying to kind of trying to imitate a mud by having these characters that can just decide to start having battles with each other. It sort of does do that, but it feels puzzling when you're on a computer and you obviously it's not a mud, so. It doesn't, it just feels like they've loosed all these kind of random. We've had a few of these games where you've got these emergent behaviors, and some of them work better than others. We recently reviewed Sherlock, the various Sherlock games, and there was obviously the one there where we had the Melbourne House game, and that was doing that same sort. But I think that was more successful than this. This wasn't really so much clever emergent behavior, like Lestrade getting into an accident, Barney with a taxi driver because you've asked him to give you your money. It's not that. It's just that they're able to start fights with each other, which isn't nearly as interesting.
Yeah, I'm hoping for more out of the next parts when we get there, because if you're going to have a 3-part game, which again part of it is for convenience because they're not loading content from disk, but hoping to see more. We do have, unfortunately, the last moment of this is a wink and a nod that not everything in reality is what it seems. So I'm a little concerned that this is going to be like the Pawn, and we can't just be earnest about having our nice fantasy story in a video game, that we have to. No, we have to play with the form, but I will not prejudge it before we get there. Grindel Guts the Orc, after collecting so much rope. And solving a few other puzzles, but mostly those involving rope, is able to get a one step closer to finding those who have kind of left him for dead. Yeah. Did you happen to die at all? It's a very, very literary sequence as the Valkyries carry you off and.
I don't think I did.
Oh, do yourself a favor and find a way to get killed, just to get the elaborate section. Because I will say in the earlier level 9 games I'd played, Snowball and that, I was not terribly impressed with the writing. Definitely not with the puzzles. But Lancelot and Knight Orc both. I'm sitting here going like, these guys can write a bit.
Yeah, loved Lancelot, and this is good. It's not as good as Lancelot in my opinion. Yeah, so part 1, would you do it again?
Well, I will. I probably will do it again as I.
Are we going to see?
As it
Are
ramp
we going to
up.
be putting off part 2? Are we going to be? Are we going to be jumping on it?
Well, I don't want to wait another 13 plus months if that's what you mean. But yeah, we'll get that on the slate here. And may I just read another one of my favorite passages from the novella that I
Of course, go for
copied
it.
out here because frankly it has one of my favorite constructions for this body part. She was a big one, more than twice his size, with massive meaty thighs, 4 legs as thick as carrots, and rolls of spare flesh that undulated as she waddled. Under different circumstances, Grok would have fancied her for lunch. But just then, Grok didn't fancy her for anything. Not enough talk of meaty thighs out there in the world, so thank you, Peter McBride, for putting that out there in the world.
Yeah. No, good stuff. Good stuff. It's an interesting read more than there are bits that were funny, but it's interesting, and I do wonder. Again, I'd love to know what the influences were on this. And it's a clever conceit, isn't it? This idea that you're an orc, for goodness sake, you're the bad guy. So
yeah, and I think that meant, and I think the game did a good job tonally with, don't think about it too hard. You're just going to steal Rapunzel's hair. Don't think about it too hard. You're just going to club this guy.
Yeah.
And I thought that was done in a matter-of-fact way that wasn't, like dwelling on, ooh, look how edgy we're being. That was just like, well, no, this is how an orc would solve his way out of this problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's go.
Yeah, I'd have to say, with all that business of finding various ways of extending the rope, it was there was some cute to begin with. To even figure that out, there were some funny things you had to attach, and then it would just say that it had this one line for the 2 ropes join seamlessly.
Magically join, yeah.
Yeah, magically join seamlessly. So there's all this stuff that doesn't look like it ought to be anything to do with a rope, and you join it to the rope, and then it seamlessly, magically becomes part of the rope, which is a little bit of a kind of a little bit of a funny thing. There we are. So we're looking forward to the next part.
Yes.
And and I think we're done for now.
We are unstuck on Knight Orc, which feels good. Kind of shaking off that.
Is this our
rust.
first cliffhanger?
Yeah. Well, I mean, apart from are they going to actually play that game next? We've learned not to promise that. So yes, I think this more finishes off that cliffhanger that we set out there way back in episode 1, and now we're creating more just anticipation for parts 2.
But listener, this leaves you with an opportunity. You can play along with us. So if you play part 1, then by the time we come to part 2, we'll let you know. Play it with us. Come back, see whether you agree with us. I think on that note, Jason, I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Ben.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to The Retro Adventurers, a podcast about classic text adventure games. This episode was produced and edited by Jason Compton. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, including Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Podcast Addict. Visit us at retroadventurers.com and follow us on Facebook and Blue Sky. The Retro Adventurers is based on a format originally devised by Ben Collier, Jason Compton, and Dave Hawkins.